Thousands of years ago, long before the arrival of Europeans, the North American continent was home to a rich tapestry of indigenous cultures. Around 15,000 BC, the first people arrived in the Americas, crossing the Bering Land Bridge from Asia. Over centuries, they migrated across the continent, adapting to diverse environments and developing unique ways of life. From the Arctic to the Southwest, Native American tribes thrived, each with their own languages, traditions, and beliefs. In the East, woodland tribes like the Iroquois Confederacy formed complex political systems. The Great Plains were home to nomadic tribes like the Sioux, who relied on buffalo for survival. The Southwest saw the rise of Pueblo peoples known for their adobe dwellings and advanced irrigation techniques. These diverse cultures shaped the land for millennia, leaving an indelible mark on the continent's history. The arrival of Europeans in the late 15th century would forever alter the course of Native American history. European exploration of the Americas, driven by a thirst for wealth and power, brought profound and often devastating consequences for indigenous populations. The arrival of Europeans introduced new diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, to which Native Americans had no immunity. These diseases spread rapidly, decimating entire tribes and leaving lasting scars on their communities. European powers, including Spain, France, and England, established colonies in the New World, claiming vast territories for themselves. The Spanish conquistadors, driven by gold and silver, conquered empires in Mexico and South America, enslaving and exploiting indigenous populations. The French established trading posts in Canada and along the Mississippi River, engaging in the fur trade with Native American tribes. Meanwhile, English settlers began arriving in the early 17th century, establishing colonies along the Atlantic coast. The clash of cultures between Europeans and Native Americans led to conflict, displacement, and the erosion of traditional ways of life. European diseases, warfare, and forced assimilation policies took a heavy toll on indigenous populations, forever altering the demographic and cultural landscape of the Americas. By the 8th century, 13 British colonies had taken root along the Atlantic coast, each with its own distinct character and economy. These colonies, stretching from New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south, were a diverse mix of cultures, religions, and economic practices. They were bound together by their allegiance to the British Crown, yet each colony operated with a significant degree of autonomy. The New England colonies, founded by Puritans seeking religious freedom, developed a strong maritime tradition, engaging in fishing, shipbuilding, and trade. The rocky soil and harsh climate made large-scale farming difficult, so the New Englanders turned to the sea. Their ships sailed to the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa, creating a bustling trade network that brought wealth and goods to the region. The middle colonies, known for their fertile soil and religious tolerance, became breadbaskets, producing wheat, barley, and oats. These colonies, including New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, attracted a diverse population of European immigrants. The rich farmland and moderate climate allowed for successful farming, and the region's rivers facilitated trade and transportation. The southern colonies, with their warm climate and long growing seasons, developed plantation economies based on cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. These colonies, including Maryland, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, relied heavily on agriculture. The vast plantations required a large labor force, leading to the widespread use of enslaved Africans. To meet the growing demand for labor on southern plantations, colonists turned to the transatlantic slave trade, forcibly transporting millions of Africans to the Americas. This brutal system of human trafficking had devastating effects on African societies and created a legacy of racial inequality and injustice that would persist for centuries. The institution of slavery became deeply entrenched in the Southern economy and society, shaping the region's culture and politics for centuries to come. Enslaved people were forced to work long hours under harsh conditions, and their labor was the backbone of the Southern economy. The wealth generated by plantations allowed Southern planters to wield significant political power. As the colonies grew in population and economic power, so too did their desire for self-governance. Town meetings and colonial assemblies became forums for discussing local issues and asserting colonial rights. The colonists began to see themselves as distinct from their British counterparts, developing a unique American identity. British policies, particularly the imposition of taxes without colonial representation, fueled resentment and sparked calls for independence. Acts like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts were seen as overreach by the British government, infringing on the rights of the colonists. The presence of British soldiers in the colonies only heightened tensions. The cry of "no taxation without representation" became a rallying cry for colonists who believed they deserved the same rights and freedoms as their counterparts in England. This sentiment united the colonies in their struggle against British rule, setting the stage for the revolutionary movement that would eventually lead to the birth of a new nation. Section 4. The Fight for Freedom, Revolution, Independence, and a New Government. In 1775, tensions between Great Britain and the American colonies erupted into open warfare. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War, a bloody conflict that would last for 8 long years. Led by General George Washington, the Continental Army faced a formidable foe in the British military, but they were determined to fight for their independence. The Declaration of Independence, adopted on July 4, 1776, proclaimed the colonies' separation from Great Britain, declaring that all men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This document, penned by Thomas Jefferson, would become a beacon of hope and inspiration for generations to come. After years of struggle and sacrifice, the American colonies emerged victorious, securing their independence with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The newly formed United States of America faced the daunting task of governing itself, a challenge that would test the very fabric of the nation. Section 5. Westward Expansion, Manifest Destiny, and Its Dark Side. The concept of manifest destiny played a pivotal role in shaping the history of the United States, influencing its policies and actions during the 19th century. With the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the United States gained a vast territory extending westward to the Mississippi River. This monumental event marked the beginning of a new era of expansion and exploration for the young nation. This expansion ignited a belief known as manifest destiny, the idea that it was America's God-given right to expand its dominion and spread its institutions across the continent. This belief was not just a political doctrine but a cultural ethos that permeated American society. Driven by this belief, settlers, land speculators, and adventurers pushed westward, seeking new opportunities and forging new frontiers. They braved harsh conditions, unknown territories, and numerous challenges in their quest for a better life. However, this westward expansion came at a heavy cost for Native American tribes who had called these lands home for centuries. Their way of life was disrupted, and their communities were torn apart by the relentless push of settlers. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803, which doubled the size of the United States, further fueled westward expansion and intensified pressure on indigenous populations. This acquisition opened up vast new territories for settlement, but it also led to increased conflicts and displacement of Native American tribes. Treaties were broken, lands were seized, and Native Americans were forcibly removed from their ancestral homes, often through brutal and inhumane means. The promises made to them were frequently ignored, leading to widespread suffering and loss. The Trail of Tears, the forced relocation of Cherokee Nation from their southeastern homelands to Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, in the 1830s, stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of westward expansion. Thousands of Cherokee people were forced to march over 1,000 miles, facing extreme hardships along the way. This tragic event, marked by disease, starvation, and death, exemplified the injustices inflicted upon Native Americans in the name of manifest destiny. The suffering endured by the Cherokee and other tribes during this period is a somber chapter in American history, highlighting the dark side of the nation's expansionist ambitions. Section 6. A Nation Divided, Slavery, Secession, and the Civil War. The issue of slavery, a festering wound since the nation's founding, reached a boiling point in the mid-19th century. The institution of slavery had been a contentious issue, creating deep divisions between the northern and southern states. While the North moved towards industrialization and a more diversified economy, the South remained heavily dependent on agriculture and, by extension, on the labor of enslaved people. The Southern economy, heavily reliant on slave labor, clashed with the growing abolitionist movement in the North, which condemned slavery as a moral abomination. Abolitionists, driven by a sense of justice and humanity, organized rallies, wrote pamphlets, and lobbied politicians to end the practice of slavery. This growing movement created a sense of urgency and fear among Southern states who saw their way of life being threatened. As new territories were added to the nation, the debate over the expansion of slavery intensified, pushing the country closer to the brink of disunion. Each new state admitted to the Union had the potential to tip the balance of power in Congress, leading to fierce debates and compromises that only temporarily quelled the tensions. The Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 were just band-aid solutions to a growing national crisis. The election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican opposed to the expansion of slavery, in 1860 proved to be the final straw for many Southern states. Lincoln's victory was seen as a direct threat to the institution of slavery and the Southern way of life. His platform, which included halting the spread of slavery into new territories, was unacceptable to the Southern states. Fearing that their way of life was under threat, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. These states believed that secession was their only option to preserve their economic interests and social structures. Secession conventions were held, and declarations of independence were issued, leading to the formation of a new government. This act of secession ignited the Civil War, a bloody conflict that would pit brother against brother and test the very soul of the nation. The war was marked by brutal battles, significant loss of life, and widespread destruction. Families were torn apart and the nation was plunged into a state of chaos and uncertainty. The Civil War, fought from 1861 to 1865, was a watershed moment in American history. It was a conflict that would determine the future of the United States and its values. The war saw significant battles such as Gettysburg, Antietam, and Fort Sumter, each contributing to the eventual outcome of the conflict. It was a war fought over the meaning of freedom, equality, and the future of the nation. The Union and the Confederacy had fundamentally different visions for the country's future, and the war was the ultimate test of these competing ideologies. The sacrifices made during this period were immense, and the consequences of the war would shape the nation for generations to come. The Union victory preserved the United States as a single nation and abolished slavery, forever changing the course of American society. The end of the Civil War marked the beginning of a new era, one in which the principles of freedom and equality would be more fully realized. The abolition of slavery was a monumental step forward, but it was only the beginning of the long struggle for civil rights and justice for all Americans.